Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. As I was doing some research for a video, shout out to Gaming Historian by the way, I really got me thinking, and one of the coolest things I loved doing when I was a kid was looking for tips, tricks, and passwords in old video game magazines. Fast forward to 2016, when they released a strategy guide called Playing with Power for the NES Classic Edition. So I thought I'd take a look at it and show you guys. And that's what I want to talk about on today's episode. So roll that intro. So back in 2016, Nintendo released the NES Classic Edition. It was basically 30 NES games that you could play on your HD television with HD visuals, and it was extremely convenient. Look at this thing. I mean, it looks awesome, plus it was easily portable if I wanted to take it over to my friends or families and get together and play a little bit. And this system is really cool. Even if you don't hack it, the 30 games that are on it are pretty good games. Now there's a couple lackluster titles, but overall this is a fantastic package. And they didn't release a ton of these things, so nowadays they're pretty pricey if you're trying to just pick one up. And you have to be careful because there's a ton of knockoffs of these. They almost look exactly like the original box, so you got to be really careful. But when I picked this up in 2016, there was a couple different accessories that you could pick up for it, and you could actually buy another controller because the NES Classic Edition only came with one controller. So if you wanted to play the two-player games on here, you had to buy a special controller because it wouldn't use the original NES controllers, obviously. As I was at the store trying to find a second controller, which is this right here, which are extremely hard to find also. It's crazy. This thing sold so easily for Nintendo. I don't know why they just keep making these and mass produce them, because these were being scalped for a ton of money, and there's so many fans of retro games that they would love to have this. And I think these controllers were even less produced because I don't ever see them go up for sale hardly at all. And there was one other thing that they had at the store that day, because when I went, there's no way you were finding one of these, so I was pretty upset. But they did have a strategy guide. Let me move this over right here, called Playing with Power for the NES Classic Edition. And this book right here is fantastic. I read through it a couple times, but there's tons of information in here, so I thought I would go through and just talk about it a little bit. So basically, it just covers the 30 NES games that were included with the NES Classic. And it just has your standard introduction page and index. But one of the cool things it has is a foreword. It's basically introduction, and it just talks about when it first came to the home market 30 something years ago. And these were the little kiosks that they would set up so you could actually play the NES games to get you to buy them at the store and hype you up for the console. And it just talks about that. It talks about the insides of the NES, because not a lot of people knew what was inside the original Nintendo Entertainment System. And it talks about everything. The 72-pin connector, the CPU, how the controllers, the RF modulator, just all the stuff on how it worked. And, it's just really interesting if you are a fan of Nintendo. But as I was going through this, I thought I'd highlight a couple things. This is the Nintendo launch titles that came out. Now check this out. On October 18th, 1985, the NES launched with 17 titles.
Damn!
I mean, just think about that. When's the last time a console came out that you can remember that had 17 launch games? I mean, the 64 had 2 games. So this was super crazy. So just think of being able to get an NES on the first day it came out, and you had 17 titles to choose from. And these aren't no slouches either. There's a couple stinkers in here, but I mean, Super Mario Brothers, Kung Fu, Excitebike, Duck Hunt. I mean, there was some awesome games. Even golf was pretty decent. So if you were a fan from day one, you had a ton of titles to pick from. And to me, that's just so cool. And on the next page, it'll just go through the 17 titles and talk about how to play it. Like this one's about Excitebike. So it talks about the tracks, all the different things for the level editor, and it even will have some tips and tricks on certain games. So it has Ice Climber info, and then it has like, the bonus stages and stuff like that. And I know all this information now, you can just look up on your phone. I'm not a moron, but to me, just having it in hand and looking through it like you did when you were a kid, I don't know, it just brings back so many awesome memories. The original Super Mario Brothers, I mean, it has full level layouts. Back in the day, these would have been extremely vital if you were trying to find certain secrets or how to beat a level. The next section is really awesome. It's called the early period, and it pretty much shows the rest of the titles that were released after the 17 launch titles. And it has games like, Donkey Kong, the original Mario Brothers, Gumshoe, and Urban Champion. And that's around 1986. And then it talks about the middle period. And I don't care what anyone says, from 1987 to 1989, man, the NES was on top. It had some top tier titles. Check this out. The Legend of Zelda, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, Kid Icarus, Metroid. I mean, the list goes on and on. Mario 2, Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link, Faxanadu, Tetris. I mean, such a great 2-year period for the original NES. And this I want to touch on rather thoroughly. Do you remember playing Metroid when you were a kid? Now be honest with me. Did you beat it? Because I know I didn't. And one reason a lot of people didn't beat this game is because it had an insanely long password system. So it wasn't like you could just save at any point. It gave you this humongous password with lowercase and uppercase letters, numbers, and you had to put this all in. And if you were one off, there goes all this inventory you had and everything, and in the spot you were in the game and everything. So it's just really cool to see all this stuff. And one clever thing in this game that I don't know if a lot of people know is early in the game, you get the Ice Beam. Now, a lot of people like the Ice Beam because it helps you get to a ton of places that you weren't supposed to get that early in the game. But about halfway through the game, you pick up the Wave Beam, and it makes the game a lot easier. But the last section of this game is nearly impossible to beat if you don't have the Ice Beam. So what people were doing was they were going through this game, getting the Wave Beam, and then they couldn't beat the game because at the end of the game, you fight these little things, and they're the actual Metroids. But the only way to actually defeat them easily is to have the Ice Beam and freeze them. So if you had already gotten the Ice Beam and then picked the Wave Beam over it, you were pretty much screwed. But the developers of this game actually knew this, and they put in a secret Ice Beam that you could pick up right before you went to Torian, where you fought Mother Brain. And I just thought that was awesome forward thinking, but not a lot of people knew about the Ice Beam. So tons of people wrote into Nintendo Power complaining about it. And look at this. It has a map system. Now, if you know Metroid, you know one reason it's extremely hard to beat is because it doesn't have a map system. You don't know where you're at. It's like a rat in a maze. So having this all at your fingertips, I would have killed for when I was a kid. It even talks about The Legend of Zelda, which at the time was one of the most ambitious games I'd ever played. It was like so overwhelming, that and Metroid, because you weren't just going one direction and trying to save a princess. This was a wide open, like RPG style game, so it was very hard to grasp when I first played it. But it talks about everything in here. And another section talks about behind the scenes with Shigeru Miyamoto, and he's pretty much the creator of Mario. Everybody knows him, so I'm not going to get into it because he's just an iconic figure, and games wouldn't be where they are today without this man. So it just talks about him. Talks about Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link. Shows all the items, and look at this. Now, wouldn't this have been awesome to have when you were a kid? Just check that out. The entire Hyrule map with all the items, and shows you where to go, all the caves, the Death Mountain order. safer so you can actually make it through Death Mountain without taking unnecessary turns and insane damage. And one of the coolest sections in this book is called the Late Period, which was considered 1990 to 1994. And this is when the system was kind of not dying, but the Super Nintendo came out in 1991, so a lot of people just upgraded and kind of forgot about the NES. But one line in here really piqued my interest when I read it. It says, Nintendo originally had plans to support only the NES for the foreseeable future, but with their competitors finding a foothold with games with a higher graphic fidelity, Nintendo realized they had to respond with a console that went beyond the NES. Enter the Super Nintendo. And just think, this console was out about 6 years at this point, and they were still releasing bangers for it. Super Mario Bros. 3, Star Tropics, Kirby's Adventure, and these are just first party, just a ton of great games. So they wanted to continue just milking the NES for all it was worth. And just think about that. Some of the later titles, like Panic Restaurant, Bonk's Adventure, Little Samson, those games were fantastic. It was pushing the NES to its limits, and that was like 1994. So just think if they would have kept pushing this console. I bet there would have been a ton more great titles. 3 years into the Super Nintendo's life, the NES would have still been pumping out fantastic titles. That just goes to show you what kind of stranglehold Nintendo had on the video game industry. And at the end, it has the NES peripherals. And these are just some of the things that were released, like the 4-score, the NES Advantage, and this thing called the hands-free controller. I'd forgotten all about that. So, this book is pretty cool. Other than that, if you have any memories of the NES Classic Edition or the original NES, leave them down in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, keep on reminiscing, baby.
Oh, shit! What the hell are you doing? I don't believe this. I got the scroll weapon, and I almost beat Mecha Turtle at the end of level 3.
You got the scroll weapon?
Yeah.
He's losing his mind.
Oh.